headline, freedom of the press, who, what, when, where, why, and how we got it. This is Federal Hall National Memorial on Wall Street, Lower Manhattan. On this site, but in a previous building, John Paul Zenger was imprisoned and tried for printing seditious libel against the inarguably corrupt governor, William Cosby. Yes, Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was a bad guy. This is 1730s, so New York is still part of a British colony. So Cosby was not an elected New Yorker. He was appointed and sent over by King George II. First thing Cosby did when he got here was try to extort money from his predecessor. Then he illegally seized land. He disenfranchised voters. He tried rigging an election. And then he fired or sued anybody who stood in his way. But some of those folks formed an opposition party. They wrote detailed articles exposing Cosby's corruption, which would have been a great idea because most New Yorkers at the time read the newspaper. But the problem was there was only one newspaper, and it was aligned with the Crown. There was no way they were going to break the law by printing something so negative about the government. Because that's what libel could mean back then. It didn't matter if it was true. You were not allowed to say something so bad about the government. Well, because that could have been dangerous for them. There were only a few people in governance and a whole lot of people being governed. If the masses and masses of people knew how corrupt or incompetent the very few people in power were, the masses could start to question their authority. They could overpower the few. They could overthrow the crown. Foreshadowing. So it was for the safety of the corrupt government that the press was not allowed to print anything so bad, even if it was the truth. But Bill Cosby was very, very bad. And it was for the safety of the people that they needed to know the truth. So John Paul Zenger was a German immigrant. He was a printer, and he was a patriot. Not only did he print those articles, he started the city's second newspaper to keep the people informed. Bill Cosby did not like this. Bill Cosby was like, hey, I poured you a drink. No, he didn't say that, but he did have Zenger arrested. The prison was in the attic of that former building. Zenger waited in prison for 10 months until his trial took place on the second floor. Now, it looked pretty hopeless for him. The judge was in Cosby's pocket. Cosby also had his original lawyers disbarred, so it seemed like he had no defense until into the courtroom walked the colony's most famous attorney, Andrew Hamilton. No relation to the founding father Alexander Hamilton, who had not yet been born. Andrew Hamilton took a novel approach. He freely admitted that his client had in fact printed those articles that the Crown was calling libelous, but he argued to the jury that everything printed was true. Truth should be a defense against libel. Hamilton came with receipts. He came with witnesses. He was ready to prove that every single bad thing printed about Bill Cosby was 100% true. And the judge said, no, stop that. Stop the presses. There will be no proving of Cosby's misdeeds. Instead, he instructed the jury not to consider whether those nasty articles were true, only whether Zenger had printed him, which his attorney had already admitted he had. So what should have been a black and white case had Cosby red all over. The jury only deliberated for about 10 minutes before they returned with their verdict. John Paul Zenger on the charge of printing seditious libel, not guilty. And the truth shall set you free. Zenger was released the next day and continued printing his paper. It should be noted that throughout the entire ordeal, his paper actually only missed one issue, which is pretty incredible. He didn't move the printing press into prison, though. His wife, Anna Katharina Zenger, had assumed control of printing the paper in his absence and continued to print the paper long after he passed away in the 1740s at only 48 years old. Now, the Zenger trial did not immediately mean instant freedom of the press, but it did set the legal precedent that truth is a defense against the charge of libel. So that allowed the papers to continue printing the truth about government corruption, specifically unfair tax practices that led the American people to call for their independence. So after the American Revolution, it made perfect sense for the people to enshrine their right to freedom of the press in the very first amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So while John Paul Zenger was not alive to print the Bill of Rights, he nonetheless put his stamp on it.